Welcome to Conducting a Cognitive Symphony, a new Procurious podcast series. Hi there, I'm Philip Eidson, the host of Conducting a Cognitive Symphony, a 5-part procurement podcast series sponsored by IBM. And there's many factors that require careful consideration to bring about effective cognitive solutions. It's really akin to conducting a group of musicians. It may be possible, even easy, to attain a pleasant sound from a solo instrument. But when expertly managed, you can accomplish a symphony from an entire orchestra. And this week, Procurious and IBM are taking you through the 5 steps to conducting a dazzling cognitive symphony, from building your orchestra to getting the brass on board and orchestrating your melody. On day 2, Orchestrating Your Melody, I'm joined by Anna Madaras, Analytics and Cognitive Lead at IBM. And for my first question, I wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page with regards to an important definition. And so I asked Anna, in her mind, what is a taxonomy?
If I would simply summarize it, in the procurement area, taxonomy is a categorization of the goods, services, solutions that you are buying. Mm-hmm. I will try to spend a little more time on the definitions because you are right. This will set the base for the detailed conversation. If we talk about procurement taxonomy, you can slice and dice it many different ways. And there is no rule which is carved into stone that this is the only way how you can talk about taxonomy. Now, let's talk about the standards first. Mm-hmm. You can think about taxonomy as a company's self-defined classification system. Many companies have it. They do have their different categories, and within those categories, they do have commodity codes or commodity IDs. Yeah. This is definitely good for internal use, so you can use it internally in your company to understand your spend and to analyze it. But with these homegrown taxonomies, you are losing the opportunity for an industry benchmark. Mm-hmm. And then you can also think about taxonomy standard as the industry standard. For example, the UNSPSC codes. Yeah. UNSPSC is a multi-sector standard, but there are also standards which are covering one industry, like the BOMA codes in the building space. Yeah. Usually both these, so both the company-defined and the industry standard taxonomies are having multiple levels, and they are having a hierarchy. It can be 2 levels, it can be 3 levels, it can be 4 levels, dependent on the needs of the industry or the company. When you talk about taxonomy, I think it's also useful to spend a little time on another definition, ontology. Mm-hmm. Ontology goes a level deeper, and it is already listing characteristics of a classification group. For an everyday user, probably these are really similar, maybe even synonyms. But we also don't want to force a really straight line in differentiating taxonomy and ontology, but in our view, both of them are really necessary for a proper strategy of your analysis.
So how would you differentiate the two?
If I were to differentiate it with 2 simple words, taxonomy for me is classification, mm-hmm. Ontology is characteristics.
Okay.
And this can be debated. So I am sure that there are long articles debating the differences.
Right. There's a couple of things I wanted to point to kind of jump on from how you answered about a taxonomy. Mm-hmm. You know, I think we're all familiar as procurement professionals with using taxonomy for things like spend analysis and for categorization. But I wondered if there's any other typical use cases that you see for using a taxonomy.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I think many companies are having risk in their radar screen, risk avoidance. One typical use of taxonomy can be also this risk area. How do you find suspicious transactions? Yeah. Transactions for which you might be paying a higher price than you should. Of course, for this one, you cannot stay at a generic level, like buying software or buying payroll software. No. For this, you have to bring your transactions to a comparable level that you can do a deep dive and you can look for patterns, you can look for alerts where you have to focus your risk analytics on. Mm-hmm. This is probably a really typical and interesting use case to consider for the company.
So it's certainly not just limited to spend and categorization. I think it's important to note that there are different ways to use taxonomies and different use cases that are perhaps broader than what we may typically think to use them for.
Exactly. And now that you are bringing up spend, so with spend, what's always on my mind is that spend has already happened. It's retroactive. You cannot take an action on your spend. It has happened. You have paid. But if you use your taxonomy proactively, of course, for that one, you can use your spend as a benchmark. Yeah. But maybe you can use taxonomy for other benchmark sources like market intelligence data or market sentiment data. Then based on these data points, you can already take good decisions for the future at the right time. If you take a decision after your spend has happened, it's too late. If you take a decision when you are still in the deal phase, when you are just getting back responses from your suppliers, and you can analyze whether that's a good price, fair price, or it could have been better, then that's the real power of taxonomy. Of course, it starts with understanding your spend, but you do have tremendous additional opportunities.
You talked a little bit about using an industry standard such as UNSPSC or homegrown taxonomies. And you mentioned one of the benefits of an industry standard was the ability to benchmark across industry. I wonder, in the reality, do you see most organizations using a homegrown versus an industry standard? And if you do you recommend they change to an industry standard kind of taxonomy? Or is there a way of kind of going on a journey from one to another so that you can take data that's in one form and bring it into another form?
This will be a mixed answer, because we do see companies who are not even having taxonomy, so who are struggling to understand their spend, and it all has to be started with an analysis of unstructured data, like their invoice text, and trying to understand what they have been buying. Then the next level is that they do already have their company-grown standards. Sometimes it is driven by the tool that they are using to do the requisitioning and the purchase order processing. We also see that some companies are having a mix. So they are having a homegrown taxonomy, but they are trying to do a mapping to an industry standard, such as the UNSPSC code. Okay. And there are also companies who are using only UNSPSC codes. This is even something which is embedded in their procurement systems. Yeah. I wouldn't have a vote which one is the best one, because none of them are perfect. UNSPS is definitely having the widest coverage, but there can be industries, there can be companies who are not finding everything in the UNSPSC code listing what they would want to buy, and then they have to have some flexibility in having an internal coding for these.
So I just want to go to the white paper for a moment and just quote a line that was in there that jumped out to me. I just wonder if you could explain it a little bit more. The line was that for a taxonomy to be effective and to feed a cognitive engine, the taxonomy actually needs to be multidimensional, flexible, and situation-based. What do you mean by those three kind of attributes?
Let's start with maybe flexibility. Yeah. Certain level of flexibility you have to have. And usually if you do have a homegrown taxonomy, then it is there by nature. But you also have to be standard enough to be able to aggregate your spend, your numbers globally. Let me give you an example. Let's say one of your geographies breaks down the software license spend into the purpose of that software, like accounting software or project management software. By the other geo is choosing that they are breaking down the software spend into whether that software license is delivered electronically or non-electronically. Both are useful, and probably both of the geos have their purpose with it. But at the end, what will be your global insight? The only global insight you can get from this is that you do see your software spend. That's it. So you still have to enforce some level of standard taxonomy, but of course, dependent on the industry, dependent on the geography, you have to allow a little bit of flexibility, but you have to keep your purpose in your mind. What is what you want to see at the end, and what is what you would be losing if you are allowing too much of flexibility. Another word on flexibility, something which we've seen, which we've experienced, is that Flexibility is sometimes interpreted in a way that you can use taxonomy not just to define what you buy, but also define how you buy things. Maybe that example of electronically and non-electronically delivered software was a good one here. But what if people are using it for defining accounting rules, for defining invoicing rules? Is taxonomy really the right place for this? Yes, you have to be flexible, but do you have to be that flexible that you do let other parts of the process to influence your taxonomy and then you have trouble later on to aggregate it? No, in this case, you really have to think about it, what you want to achieve with your taxonomy, and all these things probably you can address at another part of the process. Then, multidimensional. We've been already talking about the homegrown taxonomy. We've been talking about UNSPSC codes, but there are many other dimensions of taxonomies. For example, ontology, we've been addressing it already briefly, but also manufacturers can be sources of taxonomy. We do have a pretty granular level of taxonomy in the form of OEM part numbers. An OEM part number is clearly defining a certain product or a certain service. If you do have your notebook in front of you and you do tell me the OEM part number of it, if I type it into a browser, then I will get exactly the same notebook that you are staring at now. And multidimensional means that you really have to define what you need the taxonomy for. There are different purposes, probably for a market sentiment, understanding, for example, the market tendency in the price of the processors. It will be sufficient to have either your homegrown taxonomy's level of defining processors or the UNSPSC level. But if you want to monitor the price trend of a certain product, then you will definitely need a OEM part number. If you want to go down to the component level, what is it that is characterizing a notebook? Is it the screen size? Is it the memory? And so on and so on. And you want to look for a comparable product in your catalog, then you do need the ontology for this. So don't think about taxonomy as one fixed layer. And I think in the same sentence or same paragraph of the white paper, there was also a little bit about hierarchy. Hierarchy is really often quoted as a must for taxonomy, because if you have only one really granular layer, then you are killing your process. So it is needed. And for example, UNSPSC is having 4 levels. Let's go back to your notebook example. Now, the most granular level in UNSPSC defining a notebook is exactly notebook, OEM notebook. But if your business challenge is to know which supplier is providing a certain model cheaper, is it the manufacturer or is it the distributor, then it won't be enough for you that you do have a 8-digit UNSPSC code defining notebook. You will need again the part number. So really try to stick to the level of the hierarchy that brings you the most value. So now we briefly summarize what you need for a taxonomy to be effective. We've been covering flexibility. We've been covering hierarchy. We've covered that it should be multidimensional. What you should keep in your mind is that you have to come up with a powerful combination of these taxonomic characteristics. That's the only way how you can apply your taxonomy to the necessary situation. And then just to recap a little bit on situations, spend retroactive analysis, very basic. Most companies are doing that. But try to think beyond that. Try to use taxonomy for future transactions, proactivity, trying to predict what your prices would be, trying to evaluate whether the quotation, whether the bill of material in front of you is competitive enough, or use it for risk evaluation. Endless opportunities, but it really all depends on setting up the proper categories.
Thanks for listening to Day 2 of Conducting a Cognitive Symphony, sponsored by IBM. Head on over to Procurious.com for additional content on our blog and to contribute questions or comments via our discussion board. And you can also download Marco Romano's white paper, What are the Success Factors in Cognitive and Analytic Strategies and Adoption, via IBM.com.